KPD News Conversations. I'm Sarah Colvin. It is July, which means it is busy time on Beacon Hill. Joining me in studio, I welcome our Cape and Island State Senator Julian Sear.
Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for coming in, Julian, as always. So you were up burning the candle last night.
We were until past 11:30 at night in the Senate debating an opioid bill. This is a lot of really good things about how do we put additional tools for our first responders, for our communities on the front lines of the opioid epidemic. Nowhere more than here on Cape Cod and on Martha's Vineyard are we on the front lines if you look at the epidemiology. So the House has passed a bill as well. We're going to reconcile those and send them to the governor's desk. But this is we're in a sprint to the end of the legislative session on July 31st. And I guess legislators are like all sorts of people, and save it to the end. That's not necessarily would be my preference,
right.
But I don't make the rules up
time.
there, but at least yet. But we're doing a lot of good stuff.
Wonderful. One of those good things is the Municipal Police Training Fund legislation. Again, so important as we again learn of another officer shot in the line of duty not too far from home. Another tragedy. Tell me a little bit about the training fund legislation that is now heading to the governor's desk.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really hard spring for the men and women who serve our communities in blue. I mean, we know that here on Cape Cod and in Yarmouth and now in Weymouth. What I found out though is that I sort of just assumed that we provided, I think like many people, we provided sort of a real stable amount of resources for municipal police officers and municipal police training. In fact, Massachusetts has not been doing that. So unlike what we've done for over a decade for firefighters, we actually provide municipal firefighter training. There's a small surcharge on homeowners insurance, and that funds the work that happens in the Barnstable County Fire Training Academy, the larger academies across the state. Well, the state, our police, municipal police, never had that mechanism. And so we were funding through different appropriations. It had gone up and down. It was not sufficient. Massachusetts ranked among the lowest states in municipal police training. So in April, I first introduced legislation that would provide a stable funding stream for municipal police training. It's a $2 surcharge on rental cars, so you rent a car for a day or you rent it for a month, it's just $2. That then goes into a fund, a municipal police training committee fund. And so we passed it in the Senate in April. The Senate passed it again in May. We finally convinced the House to follow suit. They took it up as well in late May. And then the Senate actually just concurred on that. And so the House and the Senate have both passed this bill. It's now laid before the governor. It's on his desk for his signature. We're hoping he'll sign it. It's going to mean up to $10 million annually for municipal police training. So that's a really, really big help. I think increasingly we're asking police officers and first responders to do, more than they've ever done, whether it's responding to the opioid epidemic, skills you need almost to be a social worker in part, in addition to a law enforcement officer, traffic safety. And so this provides the gamut from everything from first aid and CPR, training, sexual assault training, school resource officer training, looking at implicit bias, and how do you do that. So this is going to mean that basically municipalities are not going to have costs that they incur currently now to train new recruits. It's basically going to eliminate that cost, and it's going to basically pay for almost all of their police training. So it's basically a local aid bill. We're saving municipalities and local taxpayers money as well.
And really making sure that our men and women in uniform do have the training and the education that they need to deal with the myriad of situations that they have to deal with out on the road, whether it's a simple traffic stop, domestic assault, or the opioid crisis, or so many things. They are walking into danger. They are walking into difficult situations. And as you say, they've got to be social workers. They have to understand bias. They've got to understand that procedural justice. So important to have that training and have it not be a burden on the budgets of our police
and so this is a really big deal. This is something that the Mass Police Officers Association and the Police Chiefs Association has pushed for almost a decade. They haven't been able to get any traction on it. We were able to get it done first in the Senate. The Senate's really led on this, but really had a lot of great help from our colleagues in the House, especially in the Cape delegation. But this is a big deal, and it's actually the first sort of major piece of legislation that I championed and authored and got over the finish line. That's going to the governor's desk. So definitely, I'm proud of that.
And so, any reason to think the governor won't sign this, or is it definitely a done deal?
I mean, it's his call, but I'm pretty certain he'll sign it.
Great.
It's a good piece of legislation.
And when will it go into effect? Once that's signed?
The effective date, typically there's a 90 days after the bill is signed. I think we're going to need a little more time actually because the Department of Revenue is going to need to promulgate regulations. So I think in the first of the year we're going to see it in effect. Many other states and municipalities already have these sort of small surcharges and fees on rental cars. Actually, in the city of Boston, if you rent a rental car, you already pay $10, not $10.
Wow.
That goes to a convention center fund. So this is something that a lot of other states and municipalities do. And it's a way for us to make sure that there's a stable funding stream for this important work. No matter what happens, we have highs and lows in the economy that impacts our revenue. And so the next time we have a recession, which is going to happen, or we're getting due for one, municipal police training is something that's going to be held harmless because we have a revenue stream for that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your dedication to that bill for sure. $42 billion is the number I want to talk about next, and that's the number of the fiscal 2019 state budget.
So it's $41.88 billion.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. I was rounding up.
Yes, it's a big budget.
$41.88 billion.
Yep. So the House and the Senate reached a compromise a little late after the July 1st deadline, but a lot of really good stuff in this budget. And actually, for the first time in a long time, since the recession and even in past fiscal years, revenue has been a little erratic. We've had to make mid-year tweaks and spending cuts, but really our revenues are very strong. This budget actually is only a less than a 2% increase from the prior fiscal year, but makes a whole host of really important investments. It doesn't raise taxes, and also it's really fiscally responsible. So we set aside another $350 million into the state stabilization fund, so that rainy day fund, so preparing for that recession. So by the end of FY19, which is the fiscal year we're going into, we're going to have $2 billion in that fund.
Wow.
Which is something that is good. We're going to be able to safeguard really critical services and programs when revenues do fall. The next time we have a recession, it's going to help with rating agencies. So this is a really strong budget on the money side. Lots of important programs. Chapter 70, which is K through 12 education funding. This is something the Senate really pushed for. We got almost a 5% increase in funding to municipalities, over I think the highest level of funding for regional school transportation, which is a real big deal here on the Cape in our regional schools. That special ed circuit breaker, so the state has a circuit breaker where we reimburse for special education costs.
Sure.
That's now going to be a 75% reimbursement. We've never
that's
gotten to
fantastic.
75%. So education-wise, this is great. Other priorities for the region: $88 million for regional transit agencies. So
Fantastic.
the CCT RTA is going to get a chunk of resources there. Tenancy preservation programs that I championed and worked with the Duffy Center and HAC and others to secure highest level funded. Over $2 million for the small business technical assistance programs that we rely on down here. So lots of good things in the budget, plus some big policy measures.
Absolutely, and I want to talk a little bit about that small business technical assistance because our local businesses really are the heartbeat of Cape Cod, and I think that we Cape Codders do a pretty good job at using our local businesses, at shopping local, but of course still big competition, and it's hard to get a small business started. There's a lot of challenges. So it seems like this will help those small businesses with 20 or fewer employees really kind of get off the ground.
This is the state's Small Business Technical Assistance Program, and it only is for businesses that are 20 people or less. So we do a lot. You heard the term sort of corporate social welfare, right? And there's a chunk of that, but this is just focused on small businesses. And really, when I look at my own family's experience, right? And my family owned a restaurant, a small business for 30 years. I look at how my parents were able to start that business. Maybe they started with $7,000 in a 20-seat restaurant in downtown Truro, right? We're able to grow that. That didn't used to be a special story out here, and that was something that you could do with a little help and a loan from the bank, maybe. But now the stakes are so much higher. The cost of doing business, the value of a property is so much higher, right? That this technical assistance that's going to help, Chiquessa Chocolate, which is an example we've talked a lot about, right? This amazing bean to bar chocolate shop in North Truro. Helping them really figure out how do you really build a business that works on that level of technical assistance. So this money goes to organizations like Coastal Community Capital, the CDP in Eastham, to help.
Wonderful. And so really, again, $640,000 in earmarks, $8.6 million in funding for statewide programs. No small task to get this all passed for sure to benefit us here on the Cape Cod. Tourism, as you mentioned, beach conservation, yep. The Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station decommissioning. Of course, this is really important because we are getting up.
We're in that critical stage. So, May 31st, 2019, this plant is closing. And this is one of the most critical times, and really want to credit my colleague Senator Vinnie DiMacedo, who was really dogged in making sure that we get this done around with Sarah Peak, making sure that, basically demanding that the administration have a working group that's going to coordinate all the various agencies that have oversight here. Puts aside $100,000 so they can hire consultants, but just so we can figure out as a Commonwealth, how do we have as much leverage as we can against this, multinational, corporation entity that owns Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. They are not, they do not have the best interest of the Commonwealth in mind. They have the best interests of their shareholders in mind.
Of course.
They have a track record, right, where we're pretty skeptical about them. And so this is really going to provide a level of oversight and allow us, the Commonwealth, to make sure that we can do everything we can. And again, our authority is limited because the feds regulate most of the activities around the fence. But how do we make sure we have a swift decommissioning? And then specifically, how do we move the spent fuel that's in that spent fuel pool 6 stories up? How do we get that into dry cask storage, which is not ideal, but far, far safer?
Right.
So that's going to be a big piece there. A lot of work we're doing on opioids, targeting over $50,000 for work in schools, working with the town of Barnstable. You recall in the last winter, we had those series of storms, and some of the most sort of chronically homeless folks were really struggling
Absolutely.
to get them into shelter. So some money for the Barnstable Police Department to work with nonprofit organizations in the county to figure that out. Making sure that we have $20,000 additional money to purchase Narcan, which is the naloxone, that life-saving antidote to an overdose. So lots of good stuff there. And then this tourism piece. How the Commonwealth funds tourism is really problematic, actually. I think we fund under $10 million a year.
Really?
This is one of this is our biggest industry down here. But the way that we had structured the funding is there was not a predictable way that the entities of the Cape Cod Chamber that received these dollars were receiving the dollars. So they couldn't predict, they couldn't plan. Right? If you're going to plan a marketing program for Cape Cod, right, you've got to buy that in advance, right? You've got to plan that out. They were never able to do that. So I was able to secure language working with counterparts in the House that basically says, look, by September 1st, we need to give them all that money for the fiscal year so they can adequately plan. So it's going to allow us to be a lot smarter with the meager dollars we get for tourism promotion. We still need a heck of a lot more. I'm still working hard to explain to people that tourism and arts and culture isn't just this nice to have thing. This is what supports our families. Many of our families here, they supported my family, supported many of my our constituents. But it's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Well, Julian, thank you so much for joining me, as always, for our update, and thank you for your hard work up on Beacon Hill.
Always a pleasure, and I think we'll have a lot more to share shortly by the end of July. So thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Cape and Island State Senator Julian Cyr joining us here for Cape Media News Conversations. I'm Sarah Colvin.